Thank you, thank you, thank you. Bienvenue à la quatrième conférence d'artistes invités de la Fondation Stonecroft, présentée par le Département d'art visuel de l'Université d'Ottawa, en collaboration avec le Musée des beaux-arts du Canada. Je suis Josée Drouin-Brisebois, conservatrice principale de l'art contemporain, ici même au Musée des beaux-arts du Canada. I would like to welcome tonight's special guests, artist Liz Magor, Dean Kevin Key of the Faculty of Arts at the Ottawa University, and Vice Dean Catherine Prince, Ginny Yu, Associate Professor of Painting in the Department of Visual Arts at the University of Ottawa, and the organizer of the Stonecroft Lectures. The National Gallery of Canada is proud to collaborate with the University of Ottawa in presenting the annual Stonecroft Lecture Series given by contemporary Canadian artists. And now, please welcome Dean Key.
Merci. Merci, Madame Drouin-Brisebois. Dear Ms. Magor, Liz, if I may. Madame la conservatrice, Madame la directrice du département d'art visuel, dear colleagues, dear friends, dear students, and dear distinguished guests. I'm delighted to welcome you to this unique event in an incredible venue. Tonight, we'll have the pleasure to hear the 4th annual Stonecroft Foundation Visiting Artist Lecture Series by the renowned artist Liz Magor. Je tiens à remercier sincèrement et chaleureusement la Fondation Stonecroft pour les arts, the Stonecroft Foundation for the Arts, pour sa générosité et son rôle primordial dans la promotion des arts et des artistes canadiens de grande envergure. Thank you for your unwavering support and for the vital role that you, the Foundation, play in promoting the arts in Canada. The Faculty of Arts and the University of Ottawa generally are proud to count you as friends and partners. I also want to offer our warmest welcome and thanks to Liz Magor dans le rayonnement artistique s'étend de la Colombie-Britannique à la Nouvelle-Écosse. Votre présence ici ce soir nous honore au plus haut point et c'est avec enthousiasme que nous attendons votre présentation et la discussion qui suivra. It's an honor to welcome you tonight and to have the privilege to hear you speak. Thank you. Merci également au Musée des beaux-arts du Canada pour sa précieuse collaboration et tout particulièrement à Madame Josée Drouin-Brisebois, conservatrice principale de l'art contemporain, pour son appui et pour son engagement. Nous nous sentons privilégiés d'avoir l'occasion de collaborer avec une experte de votre calibre. Un grand merci également à l'équipe du département d'art visuel à l'Université d'Ottawa et sa directrice, Mme Lorraine Gilbert, et la professeure Ginny Yu, pour son travail remarquable dans l'organisation de cette soirée. Ça fait beaucoup de travail, je connais très bien. Et merci beaucoup. Et finalement, merci aux membres, merci à vous, de la public, de la communauté universitaire, de votre présence ce soir. I wish you a wonderful evening, and I now ask Professor Yu to come on stage and introduce our distinguished guest and speaker tonight.
Madame et Monsieur de la Fondation Stonecroft, Monsieur le doyen Kevin Key, Madame la vice-doyenne Catherine Prince, Madame Liz Magor, Mesdames et Messieurs, bonsoir, good evening. Welcome to the 4th annual Stonecroft Lecture Series. I would like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we stand. We pay respect to the Algonquin people who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. We pay respect to all Indigenous people in this region from all nations across Canada who call Ottawa home. My name is Ginny Yu. I teach painting at the Department of Visual Arts. Au département d'art visuel de l'Université d'Ottawa, nous sommes très fiers de notre programme de maîtrise en art visuel. Les étudiants qui sont inscrits à la maîtrise sont invités à adopter une approche multidisciplinaire qui comprend une diversité de pratiques artistiques, de la photographie aux arts médiatiques, en passant par la performance, la sculpture, la peinture, le dessin, le vidéo et l'installation. During their 2-year training at the department, our students take an in-depth look at practices and theories informing contemporary art and image culture in both official languages. Our MFA program is small and selective. Only 5 to 6 candidates are admitted each year, which allows for frequent one-on-one student-professor interactions, good studio time and working space. 5 years ago, the Stonecroft Foundation for the Arts made a generous gift to the Department of Visual Arts, as they have been impressed with the effect that our MFA program was having in Ottawa art community and beyond. And they wanted to encourage us by financing 2 very important projects for the department. So together, the Stonecroft Foundation and the department created a scholarship to allow one MFA student to take a course at the Venice Biennale that I teach with Jonathan Shaughnessy, an adjunct professor at our department and associate curator of contemporary art at the National Gallery of Canada. This collaboration with the gallery allows the student to do an internship in the Canadian Pavilion at the Venice Biennale during the events of the opening week, working directly with the staff of the gallery and interacting with the professionals of the international art world. The other project, funded through the generous contribution of the Stonecroft Foundation, and also thanks to the incredible collaboration of the National Gallery, the 2 institutions with whom the department is proud to partner, is the reason we are gathered here tonight. This lecture series is made possible thanks to a significant gift from the Stonecroft Foundation in support of contemporary art discourse. The annual Stonecroft Foundation Visiting Artist Lecture Series allows the public to learn from prominent Canadian artists themselves about their practice. We are here this evening for the 4th edition of the Stonecroft Lecture Series, and this year, an internationally renowned Canadian artist, Liz Magor, kindly agreed to deliver the lecture. Liz Magor is a Vancouver-based artist who studied at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Parsons School of Design in New York, and the Vancouver School of Art. Since the early 1970s, Magor has produced sculptural and photographic works concerned with the latent, effective range of familiar materials, images, and objects. Her work has been exhibited in major international exhibitions, such as Documenta 8, in Kassel, the 41st Venice Biennale, and the 4th Biennale of Sydney. Liz Magor received the Governor General's Award in 2001, the O'Dane Prize in 2009, and the Gershon Iskovitz Prize in 2014. In 2017-18, she was a guest of the DAAD Künstler in Berlin program. And more recently, she has had solo exhibitions at Le Crédac in Ivry-sur-Seine in France, People in Milan, Italy, the Art Gallery of Ontario in Toronto, the Henry Art Gallery in Seattle, and the Vancouver Art Gallery. In 2016, the Musée d'Art Contemporain de Montréal mounted a 40-year retrospective which traveled through 2017, first to Migros für Gegenwartskunst in Zurich, then on to the Kunstverein in Hamburg and the MBAC in Nice. The exhibition was accompanied by a publication from JPR Ringier in Zurich. And in 2019, Magor will open an exhibition of new work at Carpenter Center for Visual Arts in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And this exhibition will travel to Renaissance Society in Chicago, accompanied by a publication. Tonight, Liz will give an artist talk, followed by an on-stage conversation with José Drouin-Brisebois, the senior curator of contemporary art at the gallery. Before I leave the floor to Liz, I would like to thank the Stonecroft Foundation for the Arts for their generosity and trust, National Gallery of Canada for their collaboration, artist Liz Magor for delivering this lecture, and the University of Ottawa student Tiffany April for her help in organizing this event. Enjoy the lecture. Merci. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you, Ginny, and thank you to the Stonecroft Foundation and to my various hosts. Normally, when I come to give a presentation, I do a rambling talk that is triggered or guided by a selection of images that I plan ahead of time. I usually plan the images and I don't plan the talk, and so sometimes it goes south. It goes sometimes in a rambling talk that's not prepared. I don't actually say what I want to say. The nervousness of this situation makes me fall either into a kind of lengthy technical talk because I'm really interested in how things are made and I make things myself, or I become sort of emotional and blurt out all sorts of personal things that you don't need to hear. And so I was happy to see that this is called the Stonecroft Lecture and not the Stonecroft Artist Rambling. And I wrote something, which is, remember, I have to put my glasses on. So I wrote something for this occasion, which is a first. So you're going to watch me test this against a selection of slides that I don't know how they will. I sort of planned them to choreograph together, but I'll be doing a lot of math while I'm up here. I'll be watching the 40-minute sign. I'll be watching the numbers here. I'll be looking at this. So just bear with me, and we'll see how this turns out. Okay, let me get a slide up here. Can you hear me? Am I close enough to the microphone? Everything okay? I have to admit that I spend a lot of time thinking about things, and I've spent years thinking about cigarettes. It isn't because I'm a smoker. It's not triggered by physical craving. I don't have much experience of smoking, and I have no habit driving me. I was one of those smokers that would go to an opening and bum a cigarette just so I could be outside with the coolest people. This appreciation of cigarettes might come from the movies. In spite of all efforts to squelch it, I still get excited when characters light up cigarettes. I think they're the dangerous people. I'm still sort of programmed to be attracted to those people. But I think it comes more from an appreciation of the body of the cigarette itself, with its delicate and brilliant design. Will this go far there? Okay. How beautiful are these fibrous cylinders, starting with their neat insertion into a small box, so tightly packed that it renders them square. How do they get in there without damage? Flip the top of the box and admire the regimented white-tipped filters. Observe their emergence from the pack, one at a time, in stepped sequence, filter first, white shaft following. Then notice how comfortably the chosen one fits between two fingers, no weight at all, easy to balance. Between the lips, it's a bit different, exerting a downward pull, but manageable with the mouth muscles concentrated into a small circle, or wagging up and down on the lips of a talkative smoker. Whether it's inserted like a plug in a hole or a baton-keeping score, this consensual union with the human body is the ultimate event in the life of a cigarette. We may want to quit cigarettes, but cigarettes don't want to quit us. Oh, I just noticed I can see the pictures down there. That's great. So these are pieces where I've made a pile of clothing, and then I've made a mold over that pile. Then I've cast into the mold with a sort of a special plasticky plaster. and I make a hollow form because all casts, even these big bronze things you see in parks or so on, they're hollow, which is kind of not what you expect. You expect them to be big, solid, fat bronze men, but they're actually thin little shell men. So I was interested in the shell of the form and that I could fill it with something. So many of my works are based on this notion of this deceit, let's say. This is cast also. These are cast. Most of the cigarettes that you've seen so far are real cigarettes. I'm interested in the meeting of the things that I find in the world that are real and bringing them into the studio and having them in a new context with things that I've made. In some instances, though, like these trays, of which I'm just showing a detail, I put the cigarettes on the tray. I make a composition with the things that I'm going to make the mold of. I make the composition exactly as I want it. So I put the cigarette butts there. I even put the little loose tobacco, the candy wrappers. And then I gently brush rubber over all of those things, and it unifies them into one negative. And into the negative, then I put these different colored sections of casting material. Think of blankets, big woven sheets that capture and conserve the body's heat. A blanket is a human invention at least as brilliant as the wheel. I started working on blankets about 8 years ago, in part to give myself a bit of a break from the onerous task of making molds and casts. Mold making is really hard work, and it's really dirty and unhappy. The studio is not a sweet place when I'm making molds and casting. I'm all sticky half the time with the casting material, or I've got dust up my nose, or I have to wear a mask, and I have to wear 1,000 eyeglasses to see the tiny little details. So in about 2011, I thought I'd worked too hard in my life, and so I started to see if I could expand into objects and materials and treat them in a different way. My attitude is the same, and my interest is the same, which is to understand the life of these things, but I don't always have to use the same technology. In the case of the blankets, I collected all the small blankets that were in the junk stores. They're small just because of their era. People didn't have these big square beds that we have now. And I put them together to make them big and square, big enough for a king-size bed, in a sort of a futile effort to make them contemporary. I thought if they were king size, that they might be able to continue in our lives. So that's what my friends are doing in the studio, putting them all together, repairing all the holes, basically just looking after these blankets and trying to keep them alive for another few years. I didn't know how I was going to display them. After we had done all the work on each set of kind of collaged blankets, I sent them to the dry cleaners, and they came back in their wrappings and packagings, and I thought, well, the dry cleaner is telling me, here's how to present. So I just used that. That was a big breakthrough for me. This is kind of unfinished new work. I say, think of a soft sweater, Angora perhaps, whose feathery nap notices and attends to your skin as no human can. I made this kind of work in Berlin last year. This is new work that I'll show you in an unfinished state. I say, think of shoes. Not only do they forestall a stubbed toe or punctured foot pad, but the sound they make on the earth's hard surface is exciting, a horse-like clop, a regimented rap, a cute clickety-click or a lazy flap and slap. I like a stealthy soul myself, but I'm not beyond enjoying the costume of a pair of shoes that can make me feel more vulnerable than I am, or in the opposite direction, turned me into a tank, able to drive over any surface with impunity. Years ago, I had a pair of green shoes with a low heel that made me feel like Donald Duck's wife, Daisy. It was a proportion thing when a bird-like ankle emerges from an overly wide platform, roomy enough for a webbed foot. It sounds bad, but I liked it. It was like putting a character mask on my foot and assuming a role. Face mask, foot mask, arm mask, chest mask. I should have been showing the shoes while I was talking about the shoes. So this is what I have to learn. I have a lot to learn still. So the shoes came by accident in a way. When I was in Berlin, I was cruising all the junk stores and flea markets, and I noticed that the things that were passing through that would be maybe the remnants of fashion eras were quite different from what I was familiar with at home in Vancouver. The shoes were really strange, and whenever I encountered something strange and I would show it to somebody, they'd all say, "That's GDR, that's GDR. That would be East Berlin, that's GDR." And I thought it was kind of a flippant category, the GDR. So I brought those strange shoes that I bought in Berlin, I brought them home to think about what I might do with them. And I thought that I might get more shoes and see what would be our GDR if I was in the Value Village. So I went every Tuesday, which is Seniors Day. You can come with me, I'll give you a discount. I go every Tuesday, it's very close to my studio. And I cruised the shoe shelves like this. And every week I had a different impulse to pick up some shoes. So every week I'd buy 2 or 3 pairs. In the end, I have about 33 pairs, to which I do nothing. I haven't changed the shoes at all, but I've housed them. I've spent a lot of time on their boxes, and their boxes are decorated. In these pictures, they're not finished. For these really simple little boys' shoes that are the most plain little plastic suede, what are those called? Oxfords or something? I don't know the names of these different styles. I do all this reflective paper with little bits of diamonds and things like that, as though I'm trying to recover the glamour or the impulse that went into making the shoes and delivering them to the market, and then trying to recover the excitement of the person who is shopping for the shoes in the first place. There's always a bit of razzle-dazzle in the retail arena, which I do in a very sort of Michael's craft store materials way. Michael's craft store is pretty interesting. So if I think about garments as a form of costume or a mask, you can think of chest masks, which would be blouses and jackets. And I did a large work, which I'll just show details, called Being This. I did a similar kind of Value Village cruise where I picked up all the garments that I thought had problems. Most of their problems were overdoing it. The clothes were overdone. They were like tricked out to be attractors to something, probably to other people. So the clothes themselves, by the time they'd been discarded, looked very anxious and forlorn because they I guess, apparently hadn't worked properly, and the owner had tossed them out to get a new attractor to see if they could maybe catch some friends that way. So the clothes looked pathetic. Nobody's going to wear these clothes. So I brought them back to the studio, tons of them, and I made about 70 boxes. Each one is like a little portrait of the garments, not of a person, where I collage a whole bunch of clothes together to kind of squelch the particular fashion that was being demonstrated, and to squelch the gender assignation, and to squelch all the little triggers to say I'm with it. I killed all those things and kind of made another path, a path away from the valorized, or a path away from what our friends say we should be wearing. And I put in each one a little pointer that's kind of proudly pointing to nothing, proudly pointing to a misnomer, Royal Canadian Navy, for example. That one's proudly pointing to extra large. That's a Tom Dean button. Do you know Tom Dean? So I'll continue with my reading. These are new works now. Think of bags, handbags, carry bags, all are accomplices to our crimes of collecting. These are cast bags, cast in that material I was talking about earlier, which is a kind of, I call it a polymerized gypsum. So it's a high level, it's like a dental plaster with, I buy it as a product, I don't mix it myself. And you mix it with latex, so it's not like plaster of Paris. It doesn't attract water to itself. It never breaks down. It doesn't shrink. It's fabulous for casting. I don't want to do any hot metal casting. I can do this cold casting and do it in the studio. So that's it. There I go technical again. I just go technical whenever I get nervous. I just fall into it. The liquidy part coming out is silicone rubber, as is this previous one. That whole purse is silicone rubber, and that is silicone rubber kind of oozing out of a cast bag. This is a newer work with a small critter carrying some very out-of-date ladies' stockings still in their packages. This guy doesn't know what he's got in his bag. It's a grab bag kind of lucky guy. Another lucky guy. Another guy. This guy's carrying little tiny liquor bottles. Excuse me. My mother used to carry little tiny liquor bottles in her purse. She said, well, it's if I get in a traffic jam, I've got them. And so when Mom died, I took her little tiny liquor bottles, and I took them everywhere with me in case I got in a traffic jam. Never really happened, and now they're in there. I realized by telling that story, I'm just going to contradict something I'm going to claim is a... When I say something like crimes of collecting, I wince at the moral tone of the words. I don't like how it condemns all acts of bringing things home to the status of an offense. For the same reason, I try to avoid the term consumerism, finding it sloppy and general and judgmental. But if my interest as an artist is in locating the source of emotional unease, that twitchy feeling that feels like anxiety or guilt, I can often trace it back to material and how I engage with material. For example, my body and how I neglect it. Or the earth and how I waste it. Or the stream of things that pass through my hands and come out damaged, dirty, and discarded. The flip side of the thrill of new things is the dullness of their persistence. They just won't go away. Not only do things accumulate underfoot, they get old and they fall apart. And I end up thinking that's my responsibility. These are some of the older blankets that had serious damage, and in these instances, I just celebrated the damage. So if there was a bunch of holes, these holes seem to be caused by a fire or some sparks, and I colored around all the holes so that the damage of the item was the guide to where I might put a mark or a note or a decoration. The yellow lines are where it was folded. Damages in different colors. I might, in the case of this blanket, the large holes are ringed with red, the medium holes are ringed with yellow, and the smallest holes are ringed with another color, so that it's just a kind of arbitrary decoration, but I think decoration is best when it's sort of arbitrary, and I'm kind of working in parallel with the terms of the blanket. For several years in the 1980s, I attended the events of historical reenactors. I liked how they operated their clothing and tools as time machines. I admired their appreciation of obsolete materials and technology. One lucky day at Sailors Creek State Park in Virginia, I joined a party of Civil War officers as they enjoyed a supper of reenacted food. For reenactors, nothing actually ages or deteriorates. They are masters of zombieism. They know how to turn a new thing into old and then hold it there for a frozen moment. When they're shot in battle, they lie down for 5 minutes and then get up. When they have their portrait taken, they present their modern body to a Matthew Brady mimic and walk away with an old body printed on antique glass. For the evening meal at Sailors Creek, the men spread out vintage glass jars containing pickled vegetables, spruce beer, and canned venison, all prepared according to historical recipes. Seated at a folding campaign table in a large canvas tent, they ate from old metal plates using bent and tarnished cutlery. Even their uniforms were time-defiant, tailored from cloth, woven in the terms of the 1950s, tricked out with authentic paraphernalia, buttons, and insignia. Stuff-wise, they had it nailed. Human-wise, they were less convincing. Their attempts to converse in the accent and vernacular of their hobby time was awkward, as they were unused to the courtly sounds coming out of their mouths. Weirdly short of team spirit and pertinent conversation, they seemed stunned by the mirage they had conjured. Their sentences came out in jerky bits, leaving long silences with all eyes glued to the place settings as though they envied the material scene that proceeded without them. They came across as deeply stoned, enthralled to some interior script, which was directed by their things, leaving their bodies redundant and paralyzed. One problem I've noticed with such privileging of appearance is the disparity between the imagined and the real. Appearance is unsubstantial, emanating from the object like an aura, energized by the user's narrative. In the unmeasurable space between the thing as it is and the thing as it appears, all laws of physics are suspended. The weight, the mass, the volume are nothing. The body is nothing. In its place lies pure potential, a promise of knowledge that is beyond fact, a place where subjective truth rules. These two words are uncomfortable together, subjective and truth, but if my interest is in emotional discomfort, it's a good place for me to focus. I'll bring anything into the studio, any material, object, or fragment that catches my eye. Literally, my hand reaches for the thing that my eye wants without questioning its worth or its meaning. I have to notice it, that's all, and let the questions come later. Most of what's brought in has no overt connection to my life. None of it reminds me of my parents or my childhood, except for those liquor bottles of my mom's, which none of it looks like something my grandmother owned. In fact, in the studio, it's not pertinent to say, I love this thing because it was my mother's, as the thing itself is then lost and unloved, known only by reference. Nor do I choose things of cultural significance, recognized aesthetic charm, or collectability. Instead, I look for forms presenting themselves as full and empty at the same time. Full, thanks to the relentless production of meaning within a culture, and empty due to the persistent failure of things to hold on to those intentions. This is my studio in Vancouver that I've had for 20 years. It's perfect. It's about 1,000 square feet. And I have everything there that I need to make anything, practically anything. I have, hand tools and so on, but mostly I just have everything. I work by myself until I can see, I sometimes invent how to make things, so that takes a lot of trial and error. And then when I see what the protocol for making that thing and how I want it to look, then I hire a few people, usually students that I met at Emily Carr. I might hire 2 or 3 people for a couple of months. It always seems to be in the fall because the timing just works out like that, and we have a really good time. So these next slides will show the studio and some works as they evolve into finished works. So in this picture, I'm showing you that cardboard form that's right in the middle of the studio, and I think I have slides that show its evolution to a cast thing and how it is employed with some other objects. These next slides will show you just like the little life history of an object as it makes its way to a sculpture. The full empty thing is a consolation prize. It comes to you when your arm can't quite stretch far enough to nab the golden perfect thing placed way up there on the top shelf. Even a little IKEA steppy stool won't help you reach it. You can see it, but you just can't reach it. So you take something from a lower shelf as a placeholder for the real deal, which will come when you improve your reach. In the meantime, you can attach any story you want to this thing. No one will do a DNA test to see if the story and the thing are related. You can keep the story and replace the thing at will. In fact, the vast majority of manufactured things fail to find a permanent home in the heart of a person or a people. They're contenders in a brutal competition for our affection, plucked full of promise from the retail shelf in response to an obscure need. So this is the final image of that polar bear. I call this work prone. He's about this big, and he's on a little box that I cast by pouring my casting medium into an empty cardboard box. Then I peeled the box away, and I had this little plinth thing that goes on the wall. And somehow I was happy at the end when the bear was very obscured by one of these cloudy, beautiful white bags. I was talking about these things that we pluck off the retail shelf in response to an obscure need. At first they float, sailing past everything else on the strength of their new texture or predictable color. The fresh one is the favored thing, picked up and held, shown to friends, taken out for excursions. Eventually, I want to tell you about this picture. Eventually, the new thing sinks to the level of all the stuff that arrived weeks or years before, finally becoming part of the pile on the floor, the clutter in the closet, or the mess on the counter. The next move is out, a heap of bags taken away by car and van. The Lexus, Subaru, Toyotas, and Jeeps, conveyors themselves all doomed to replacement, shuttle around in denial, heaving up their cargo to ignoble back doors and drop-off stations. For some reason, I recorded the life of this thing I found at a value village up in Vernon. I was visiting Brian Jungen up on his ranch, and we like to go junking together. And I found this beautiful seal that I had no intention of consigning to a sculpture. He became this is on Brian's dog, Ed. This was New Year's Eve or something, I think. That's why Ed is dressed up, and never mind about all that. And then eventually one day he just came to the studio. He sat on my desk for 2 years, watching everybody that came to visit me, and then he came to the studio and went through the same process that the other bear did. The studio is a quiet place. The things I bring there are fidgety at first, but settle down as I study them. I have no tool and no magnifying glass or X-ray machine to see inside them. I can just see the surface of the thing, with glimpses of how it was put together. Even with full knowledge of how it was manufactured, I'm often at a loss as to why it was made in the first place. What call came from the people for such a strained thing, such a useless thing? And a lot of it is ugly and so dismissible. At least that's my first impression. These are such nothing things, such poor things. But if I take a page from the reenactors, who essentially dial things back so that they can force their way into a book that was closed long ago, I can do the same to non-remarkable things. If I slow time down, I can easily see what the original dream was, the idea of luxury or status or agency, that these objects were meant to confer on their owner. I can also see how they missed their target. Generally speaking, it's simply a failure of material, back to that sticking point. Plastic is just not leather. If I were a proper reenactor, I would fix this problem. I would peel back the kitsch and replace it with researched authenticity. I would make that shoe from a hide taken off a deer that I've shot myself. But the reason I'm not a reenactor is that I don't like the consequence of such strict restoration. I appreciate the authentic object, but I don't want to use it as bait for the trap of repetition that historical orthodoxy sets. These next two images are things I picked up in Berlin. You might know that they have a history of toy making. It comes from the Stieff or the Steiff family who started making teddy bears. They were the first people to make teddy bears. And I noticed, I don't have good pictures of the things I found there. I noticed that their attitude towards their stuffed animal toys were there was more gravitas in their toys. The animals were kind of respected. Maybe not these two little kitty cats, but certainly this dog. They had all these different breeds of dogs. They put a kind of an emphasis on the referent, on the thing that the child might see, a giraffe or a pony or a turtle. Whereas I find that the stuffies that I pick up here are cartoony and ridiculous and debased and abused, let's say, if I want to get all haughty about it, if I want to get all personal about it. So I started buying them, the abused ones, and started turning them into people with ideas. Like just by swapping their eyes and their ears and changing their faces and getting rid of their cuteness, which you can never quite get rid of. But my plan is to turn them into agents of action and give them better jobs to do. Better jobs than just lying on your bed waiting for you to come and cry your hot tears into their plush. So I was saying I don't want to repeat history. I don't want to be traditional. So what can I do? What do I want to do? Especially if I'm digging around in the past to the degree I am. What I want to do is restore a range of emotion to these sad things in order to ameliorate the passionless desire that created them in the first place. As a plow, oh, this is really purple writing coming up, so do up your seatbelt now. As a plow digs a furrow, I'm just going to laugh at my own writing. As a plow digs a furrow on a smooth field, as a boat splits the water with its bow, as a bullet bores a hole through flesh, so does the sharpness of desire slice through the stability of the material world. It's funny, but I believe this is true. On the loose is a force so relentless and cunning that even those wielding it are unaware of the disturbance that ensues. In manufacturing, desire generates a tsunami of effort. Resources are gleaned from animal, vegetable, mineral. Research, product development, the arrangement of financing and labor, the packaging, the shipping, the advertising and promotion, all that for what? It's clear that we don't care, that our desire is without passion, that we are without love. I can't honestly say that I will redeem these things through love. I don't think I can love these awful clothes and cheap shoes. And I don't want a blanket full of holes on my bed. But as an artist, I can change the story. I don't have to use things as intended. I can put them into new contexts that will reveal their latent qualities or give them a different role. If I ignore the typical relationship of a person using object, I can make sculpture with one part caring for another part and arrange for material to no material. I can give objects agency or allow them to be disinterested in us, turn their faces to the wall, or house the things in sealed boxes and obscured pouches beyond our view. I can take the human out of the story to mount a theater of things, and I can avoid the reenactment of my poorly constructed self and the myth that I'm made by things. So this, again, is taking you through the journey of one of the things that comes to the studio. I found this sweater. Oh, I'll just back up a bit. This lady's jacket, that was a very fine lady's jacket, had its label for some reason upside down, which then told me I could hang it upside down because it wanted that in a way, which meant that when I brought something else into, so if it's upside down, it's falling in a way. If it's falling, it could be caught. This cast black thing that holds everything up is the cast of that cardboard form that was in the studio earlier. So once I turned that jacket upside down and had it falling, I could do that with some other things. I found two sweaters. I'm only showing one of them. They were both sweaters that belonged to somebody in Alberta who worked in the oil industry. One has a thing called Pembina Pipelines, and the other is the oilman's bonspiel. These are like these decals that you put on your jacket. And I thought about this interest in fossil fuel, how it grips us, and we're trying to push it off us as though it's some sort of like blood-sucking monster thing, but we can't quit it. It's kind of like cigarettes. And that to be wearing those clothes now, you're not so proud to be an oilman, I would say. I'm not sure, there might be some oilmen here that would argue with me, but it's a contested thing now. And that's a thing that objects have to, they bear that for us. They are the things that are discarded. They are discarded before we actually discard what they mean. So this little critter that was one of those hybridized critters is busy holding this Pembina light, pipeline jacket. Here's two little cashmere sweaters, very tiny. I put two little euro cents in the picture to show you how small they are. And they went through quite a bit. At first I thought they should have heads. I thought they're two people. But then they weren't. And then I found two lambs, and their bodies weren't long enough, so I cut them in half and stretched them. They got long waists, and they fit the sweaters. Then I thought they're two good friends, and because they've got matching sweaters, and they're in it for forever. And I put them on this beautiful iridescent foil that Tiffany and I share a love of, and I just call it our new sweaters. And they're lying on a cast, sort of floating carpet platform that's made from a piece of a cardboard box that's been unfolded. This is in Berlin. This is a pair of you see a lot of this. I don't know, northern stuff. You see it in Vancouver too. I guess you see it here too. But these two floppy, I once had a little dog that tried to attack somebody's shoes because he thought they were a Maltese Terrier. So I brought the boots home and I gave them some affection. He's the red guy that was holding up the jacket before, but he got disemployed from that and reemployed here. I don't know why this guy's in here, but it's a nice one. It's good. I put a dead bird. In this case, put the bird in the glove and made a mold of the two together. In earlier ones I showed you where I just made the cast of the glove and then lay those stuffed birds in the glove as though the glove is holding it. In this case, it's all one. These are what I was referring to when I was talking about obscure pouches and boxes. This is a cast. The mold is made from a banker's box, and then I have this hollow banker's box, and I cast into it this cloudy silicone rubber. Then I fill it with the thing I want to fill it with, and then I seal the bottom. So it's just like a completely surrounded rubber-sealed container with something that had at some time, my criteria is at some point this thing was extremely important. And now, for all these reasons that we don't even need to list, but you know what they are, this thing is not important. And but it's still there exactly in the same physical condition it was. It's just that how we look at it is fugitive and is gone. And so I'm into that. That's what I'm interested in. These are three examples of taking these abused little toys and giving them some agency, giving them some power to turn away from us. So I took the original toy, I fill its body with sand to make it heavy, and so that it actually does have gravity and gravitas. It's not bouncy and bouncing around on your bed. And you can't see their faces. They are forever with their backs to you. I think this is the last one. I had in my writing for a while some reference to a book that was important to me. I read a lot of books. I mean, I read novels is what I mean. I don't read books, I read novels. And I really use them as guides to ways of thinking. Good novels are like that. And I'm thinking of the novel Disgrace by J.M. Coetzee. Is his initial J.M. or J.H.? Anyhow, Coetzee. In Disgrace, this professor is disgraced because he's an asshole, and he is kicked out of the university for his abuse of students. And he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't get it. He's older. He doesn't get it. He goes off to a township to live with his daughter because he can't stay home in Johannesburg. when he's with his daughter's a lesbian, and she's working out a different way of being, and he doesn't get her at all. He doesn't get women that are not trying to be attractive to men. He just doesn't get it. And she introduces him to a veterinarian, and I remember the line really clearly. He describes the veterinarian as really dressing kind of badly and not doing her hair, and he said, I just don't understand women like that. But he has no choice. Nobody else will accept his effort to be a person and have a relationship. So he becomes a volunteer at her veterinary clinic. There's a major event that happens in the book that I won't even discuss, but it's amazing. And the way Coetzee deals with this event is really worth studying. The part I want to talk about is that after this man goes through all these changes, and he changes his point of view, he realizes that the dogs at the vet are often discarded by their owners. Either their owners can't pay for their repair, or they're just tired of them. So he sees the dogs in somewhat the same way I see these objects, as these things that we have used and not recognized the exchange that they've given us, and then just thrown them away. And what he does in a way to redeem himself, or in some form of atonement, he decides to give all those dogs a proper, instead of dumping them in a dump, which is where they went before, he takes each one and cremates it and buries the remains of the dog. And so that's somewhat in the vein of what I'm thinking of, is to be attending to these below the radar, below the valuable things that are there's more of that than there is of the extraordinary. And the idea of aspiration, I think of the shoes, I thought, what do these shoes have in common with each other, these 32 pairs? And I thought all of them are aspirants to be important shoes, to do the trick, to do the job. And they've all failed. And chances are that's what 99.9% of human endeavor is. It's an aspiration to some imagined peak, some imagined and promoted myth of what we should and can achieve, and we fall short, and we are humiliated and unjustly condemned for that. So, oh man, I think the time is gone. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Kind of feel bad asking you questions after that great talk. That was really, really great. You answered a lot of my questions, actually, but I thought there's a few things that would be interesting to kind of go a little bit deeper in. First and foremost, how was Berlin?
Berlin was a year, which is important because that's long. It's long to be in a place that I didn't plan to go to Berlin. I didn't apply to go to Berlin. So in a way, I ended up being sucked into a sort of mystery hole and ending up in a place that was fantastic. And I think in the end, I realized a number of things. I saw the place, really, Europe is the place where the kind of art that I practice and that we teach and that we do was invented there. And because it was invented there, there's a big place for it. And that place, I would call it a philosophical realm. So it's not a place of market, it's not a place of entertainment, it's a place of inquiry that I would call philosophical inquiry that in Germany and other countries value. And so I felt like I'd gone home in a funny way. I'd gone to my art home. There's 10,000 artists there. They live with pride, even though they're not rich and famous. I think in North America, if it's that aspiration thing, if you're not really well known or you're not who's collecting you, you feel a little ashamed. And I recognized the shame feeling when I went there and it disappeared. It was like losing some itch or some psoriasis or something, you know? So that was my takeaway from Berlin.
I remember having a similar conversation with an artist about how in Berlin, artists didn't talk so much about where they were exhibiting or what they were working on in terms of a show, or they were talking about what was happening in the studio, and this idea of you could be an artist and just produce and not show. And I thought that was actually a really interesting and probably the ideal for a lot of artists to have that kind of freedom to make.
Yeah, the conundrum is this. I'm 70 years old. I was born in 1948, and I couldn't find any artists, very few artists in Germany that had made it for 70 years, that were women. And those that had paid a big price for it. So in places where art is taken seriously, it can be very exclusive at the same time. You know, there's a bit of a struggle in that philosophical realm. Here, where nobody cares, you can do whatever. You're free.
That's the other
so you're
side.
free to be ignored here.
Yeah. That's the other side for sure. I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to try and just center on a couple. And actually, if there's anything that you want to talk about. But one of the things that comes out in thinking about your work, some of what you were saying as well in your talk, around the idea of the body and the absence, but also I think, you know, in a work like Hollow, for example, which was on display in the contemporary galleries for the last year, of the cast tree trunk and then the sleeping bag inside. You know, this idea as well, what you were talking about with sculpture as a shell, I thought was really interesting in terms of the casting. But here you provided a kind of in as well for the viewer, for the visitor, to kind of not physically go into the space or into the object, but want to kind of, you know, with the sleeping bag, this kind of like desire or pull. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that relationship.
I think those works, what year was that, do you think? It was the 90s?
It was the 90s, yes.
Yeah, I think I made some work where, I think the reason I talked here about objects looking after objects, I think that work before this, maybe 20 years ago, was me still needing to use objects for comfort. And so those works from, let's say, the 80s and the 90s are about looking for respite or looking for a retreat. Mm-hmm. They're kind of more about a human psychology with a need. Mm-hmm. And I'm feeling better these days. I feel I don't need to be so retreating, you know. I don't. Yes. So that to me is the difference, and to me that's a great thing for me. But it's also more interesting for me as an artist to take myself out of the equation like that.
But there's still a viewer relationship. I mean, this is a good example here with this kind of like denial of the viewer in a certain way, which I find interesting, which is the complete opposite of Hollow. In that sense of Hollow kind of inviting you in or inviting you to want to go in. And then this kind of like this sort of like denial of the viewer, which I think is quite interesting, but completely, in my mind, different. The other thing that comes to mind with Hollow in this series is really how you've started to look to the wall in a very different way. Because when I think a lot about sculpture and this relationship to the floor and the gravity of the objects themselves, you know, in thinking about Being This, which was that series of boxes on the wall, I saw that exhibition in Vancouver, and I was quite taken by the fact that it was so much about the wall, but still had that kind of sculptural effect. Is that something that you've thought about?
I think I was using the floor forever. For sculptors, gravity is a big deal. Gravity is, you have to acknowledge it. You might not, you know, make it about gravity, but you have to put your thing on something. It has to stand someplace. It's not a given where it will be. And so I was always making small objects that stood on my table as I made them. And I often didn't plan ahead where they're going to be. So when I had the exhibition in Montreal, I built a big honking shelf thing to house some of these small things. By the time I got to Zurich and Hamburg, I was understanding installation a lot better, and I just put them on the floor. But I wanted to stretch a little bit and see what the wall can do. I've always seen it as not my zone, but the blankets came before the boxes of being this, and the blankets hung on the wall the way something hangs in the closet or hangs on the back of a door. So often I look for the how to position something. I look at the house, or I look at the stores, or I look at the museums, and how do they handle small things? Because this is the problem: is the size of the domestic size of my sculptures. So I got excited about the wall. It was really great. I think though that putting the boxes on the wall is a little bit contrived. You know, they don't live on the wall. And so to me, there's a formalness there that I'm not sure I can take that very far. It works for these because it's such a small box, but I can't see it getting much bigger. There's a bunch of works I didn't show of big boxes leaning against the wall.
Oh, yes.
Big cast boxes, and they're like, 8 feet high.
But even just recently in Toronto, there were things hanging off walls, but in a different way. So they weren't attached to the wall. They were more like hanging off. And so I was kind of interested in that shift as well, and thinking about almost maybe they could have been hanging from the ceiling. It had been a different space.
That was a test piece, kind of. That was the first one I did of something hanging from the ceiling. For the work I'm making now that will go to Chicago and Boston, there's these critters. They're like the critter that's holding the sweater, except they're much bigger and they're cast in rubber, and they've got these big, and they become quite ugly. The rubber turns them into something quite grotesque. The fur is there, but it's all matted down. And they have arms, and they're holding on to laundry bags and garment bags, and they're hanging from the ceiling with their feet in a tangle. I just couldn't get a good picture of them in the studio because they're sort of discreet, and when I photographed them in the studio, there's so much junk in the studio that I just didn't want to show you.
Couldn't see it.
But so that hanging thing is a new idea. I don't know if you know the Renaissance Society ceiling is 40 feet high.
Oh my God.
I don't know what I'm going to do about that.
Wow. That'd be an interesting challenge. Thinking about your use of chocolates and liquor, and as well as some food, even thinking about Cheetos and things like that. You talked about the coexistence of two drives or two realities, a kind of stacking of one part of your life that is not quite manageable on top of another one that you manage quite well. And I assume that every single person is trying to keep the balance between control and lack of control, rational and irrational. This is something that you said to me a long time ago, but I'm thinking about desire, and I'm thinking about that tension, and is it still there in your recent work?
Is that a question?
It's a question.
Is it still there? Yeah.
Yeah, but in a different way, but there is a shift. There's a less hiding of something in a way.
Yeah.
Maybe more manifesting. Is that fair?
Yeah. It's just a maturing thing. I can't really assess myself that accurately. I can look at the work and say this work is having more fun. I've always had jokes in my work, but now it's all jokes. It's not all jokes. I'm just worried about this 25 minutes.
No, it's going up instead of going down.
It's not going anywhere. We're going to talk here all night. We're going to stay here all night. We'll get pizzas.
Ginny will stop me. 10 minutes. There we go. 10
Okay.
minutes. Thank you. Well, I think that's interesting. There's a kind of levity, maybe. Is that fair? Which I find interesting. But also when you're talking about the void and the emptiness and then filling that, or the desire to fill that. And it makes me think a lot about this maybe need in North America or in Western culture to be afraid of the empty, of the void, of this sense of, in Eastern Often in Eastern civilizations, there's this sense that the empty is where you want to be, actually. It's this kind of like, that's the goal. And thinking about, the way that you've filled some of the sculptures with the cigarettes and with the candy and this kind of really resistance maybe of the void, and how now it's quite different because you're closing it off. Like the boxes themselves are now sealed, and that's contained to me in a very different way.
Yeah, those aren't thoughts that I think.
No.
I mean, I don't think about the void. I don't think about the horror of the void. I think about the pleasure of full.
Okay.
Which is maybe, the flip side of that coin.
Yeah.
But I'm not that anxious. Like I'm not Franz Kafka. I'm not that anxious.
Well, that's a good thing. I was one of the things that you talked about, the rules, which was the piece with the cigarettes, which were made of driftwood that you collected, which again speaks to this whole idea around collecting. You talked about your interest in smoking, and there was something as well that when we acquired that work, you would talk to me about the cigarette itself, which in a way consumes itself, and it becomes garbage. Like during its short life, it goes from being kind of maybe its own thing, one of many, there's a choice of which one you decide to smoke, and then the fact that it actually becomes garbage. And I'm fascinated with this transformation and this idea that maybe, or the question is, was it intended as a reminder of mortality? Is that what?
I didn't talk about those things tonight, but being a materialist, I'm interested in the life history of a thing and its material and its the progress from its emergence, through production or through birth, and then it's peaking, and then it's fading, and then it's discarding, which is happening to everything. I guess it's the entropic, forces. But in some things you can see it in a very in quick succession, and that is why I'm interested in cigarettes, because they live and die within 7 minutes, and the smoker knows that they're dealing with death too, and it's just a kind of fabulous, beautiful relationship
and a process as well. I mean, it's its own thing, like the beginning and the end, and then you can take another one, and it also consumes itself. It's quite
That's why
interesting.
I admire smokers, because they're not in denial.
Last question, and then I'll open the floor for questions. Well, there's a few, but one of the things that I actually am quite fascinated with, and I've been doing some research recently about the Venice Biennale and thinking about your exhibition there with Ian Carr-Harris in 1984, and the piece specifically thinking about life journeys, Dorothy, a Resemblance, which is a piece with the cast lead, and how that came about. From my understanding, it was a story that Dorothy told you about her weight, and so her own journey through life. Can you talk a little bit more about the idea of journey?
Dorothy, a Resemblance is a work I did when I was in my 20s, maybe, or early 30s. So I was thinking about and trying to get used to the idea of change, which I don't like, because I'm an anxious person, so I want everything to stay the same. But by the time you're 20 or 25, you think, no, nothing stays the same. It just keeps moving. And so whenever I encountered an instance of a person who identified themselves through change, and Dorothy was an old woman, probably 70, who told me this story about her weight changes, which were quite extreme, because she was a tiny person in the first place, but she got sick and she lost a lot of weight. And then she gained some weight. And then she said, then I got back to myself. And so she identified with, she was only Dorothy when she weighed 98 pounds. And these other things were abnormal, anomalies, and not to be tolerated. And I don't know that I had an opinion about that, but I thought, well, that's one way to go. But another way to go is just to say, this is me all the way through. I don't know which one. It wasn't a judgment call, but I was thinking about the relationship of perception to the material, and her perception was hers to have, right? She can alter that. You can change how you think about something. You can't change the thing.
But it was a kind of measure of her life in a strange way, which is quite interesting. One more question before I turn it over. Who is your ideal viewer for your work? And thinking about, I'm quite interested in what you're talking about as well in terms of your understanding of things when you made Dorothy a resemblance and your understanding of things now. Do you think that that has an impact in terms of the viewer or where they're at?
You mean, did I change because of the viewers?
No, the opposite. Do you think there's an ideal viewer for your work now in terms of who they are, or where they're at?
I don't think about it.
No.
I think when I did Dorothy a Resemblance, I was also learning about meaning in the sense that I suddenly saw that a thing will mean a totally, entirely different thing depending on where you're standing.
Okay.
Again, that was a maturing thing. I had just, I'd grown up taking English courses where they said, this is what this means. This is what this poem means. This is what this book, this is what the author means. So I thought, oh, there's sort of a direct line. And when I started making art, I found that line was so indirect that it was scary. It was like a hot thing. It was scary. And I thought, I'm either going to not do this or get used to this, the multivalence of meaning. At which point I stopped using the word meaning, not because it doesn't exist, but because it's not stable and it's not mine.
That's interesting.
And I don't own it. So when I'm making something, I think the ideal viewer is the thing itself. It has to look at itself and be complete in itself and all the relationships within the work. I will interrogate those relationships, but they answer me in their way, through my ventriloquism. So the work itself is its ideal viewer, which sounds pretty zen, but
I like that. Thank you. So the floor is open for questions. If possible, please use the mics in the aisle. Liz? Yes. Yeah.
Hello. I don't mind if you go totally technical. That's totally why I'm here. I was just wondering, you mentioned mixing gypsum and latex, but at one point you mentioned going in with colored layers, and I was just wondering how you pigment things.
Okay, that's a good question because I invented something for myself, and it became important. I found if I make a rubber mold, so I'm making rubber molds out of silicone rubber. Silicone rubber has a very bad. It doesn't conduct electricity, so it has a lot of static. So if I take dry pigment and on a brush, I put it into, let's say, the where that cigarette was. Do you remember the cast cigarettes? And I put a little bit of white pigment in the rubber mold, in the negative, where the shaft of the cigarette is, and just kind of dash it in. And then I hit the cork a little bit with some sort of sienna or some sort of orange. Then when I pour the casting medium in, it grabs that pigment and comes out colored. It's brilliant. Because I don't want to paint them afterwards. I'm not a painter. I don't want to paint them. I also don't want them to be super realistic. Do you know what I mean? I don't mind all these accidents where sometimes that white gets spread and it ends up on the tray, or the cork is a little bit, kind of like when you see somebody with bad eyesight and they put lipstick on and it's a little bit up here. And it's so endearing. I love that. So I do that. That's how I do that.
Other questions?
First of all, I just want to thank you for an amazing talk. It was, I think, the most interesting artist talk I've ever heard, and I've heard a lot. I'm fascinated by your foray and your way of speaking about your work into all of these realms that seem kind of psychological and emotional, but without ever leaving the materiality of the stuff you work with. And there's a word that I've always been fascinated with this word called cathect. And I read about it when it has to do with when we come across an object and we decide it's going to be ours. And it always reminded me of like somebody's skin somehow incorporating this object inside of itself. And somehow your work makes me think about the really inescapable and completely immersive world of objects that are always soliciting us in all kinds of ways. But there's a tenderness, and there's an affection and a fondness, and the word abject gets thrown around a lot, and that's all in your work too. But I guess I don't really have a question. I'm just really impressed. So thank you.
One last question. I'll ask one last question. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about, or a little bit about the undercurrent of dark humor in your work.
You mean why it's there, or where it comes from, or what its value is, or how it works, or
Anything.
who's on first?
Just talk about it.
I come from a wiseacre family. I have 4 brothers, and they're wise guys. So we had to be funny at home, and mean funny. That's the sad part. We were very mean, but we did it like with our mouth. And so at some point I didn't like it. I was getting a thrashing because they were so witty, and they could do accents, which I can't do. They could do all sorts of accents, be a Texan or something, and just somehow I was always losing. So I'm a serious person, and I have lots of concerns, and I'm just trying to figure it out. So I spent quite a few years really using my work to figure out how I can be in the world. I didn't have models. I mean, that's just a woman's problem. It's hard you have to just do it inch by inch by inch. And so I guess gradually, I was always funny in person, but the humor in the work is just sort of like, now I'm relaxing now, I'm more comfortable, and I'm more, I was saying the other day that because I'm 70, I don't have long to go, so I know the trajectory of my life, and I'm relaxed. If I'm 30, I'm thinking, how am I going to deal with 50 more years? It's like all the bad things that could happen. But now I think, well, in 10 years, nothing bad can happen in 10 years, right? I can handle it.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming so much. And thank you, Liz. That was great.